The dead of winter had a silence that screamed. Snow blanketed the earth, muting every sound, turning the forest into a frozen cathedral. The trees, stripped bare of their leaves, stood like ancient bones etched against a pale gray sky. John Miller, a fur trapper hardened by seasons alone in the wilderness, moved through this silent world with cautious steps. His boots cracked through the crusted snow along the riverbank, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He wasn't searching for anything, at least not something he could name. His heart had long been numb, dulled by grief and solitude. But then, through the whisper of wind and crunch of snow, he heard it, a cry, faint, weak, yet unmistakably alive. It stopped him cold, and for the first time in a long time, his pulse quickened. The cry drew him closer to the edge of the river, where the icy water flowed sluggishly beneath a crust of fractured ice. There, tangled in a thicket of reeds, was something he never expected to find in this forsaken place. A small cradle basket, hand-woven from river grasses and animal hide. It rocked gently with the current, half submerged in freezing water. Inside, wrapped tightly in fur and trembling with shallow breath, was an infant. Her skin was pale from the cold, her lips tinged blue, but she was alive. A native child, likely no more than a few days old. Abandoned or worse, orphaned. John stood still, the snow swirling around him, heart pounding in his chest. The wind howled like a warning, yet he reached down with unsteady hands and lifted the fragile bundle from the river. Holding the baby against his chest, John felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. But it was fleeting. Doubt rushed in. He looked around, half expecting anyone to emerge from the woods. But there was no one, only silence and trees and cold. Taking her meant risk. The local town feared the nearby tribes. Raising her meant questions he wasn't sure he could answer. And what if her people came for her, or worse, never did? He stood in the snow, clutching her tightly, staring down the path he'd come from and the one ahead. He could lay her down and walk away. No one would know, but something inside him, a part of his soul that hadn't stirred in years, whispered, "Don't leave her." The wind chased him back to his cabin. The baby lay still in his arms, barely stirring. Inside the tiny log shelter, he built a fire with trembling hands. The warmth crept back slowly, and the baby let out a soft whimper, a sign of life he hadn't dared hope for. He wrapped her in more furs and set her gently near the hearth. Then, unsure of what to do, he just watched her. For hours. Speaking to her softly, telling stories he hadn't spoken aloud in years, about the stars, about the trees, about her. He called her Willow, after the resilient trees that bent in the storms but never broke. She blinked slowly, her dark eyes watching him, listening. Maybe even understanding. And in that firelight, something inside him cracked open. Willow was stronger than she looked. Over the next days, she battled fever, hunger, and cold, with the quiet resilience of something ancient and wise. John barely left her side. He brewed pine tea, fed her with trembling spoonfuls of broth, and wrapped her tighter in pelts to keep the warmth in. Each day she grew stronger, her cries louder, her eyes brighter. She responded to his voice, followed his movements, reached for his hands. The bond between them deepened not with words, but with shared silence, with breath and heartbeat. It terrified John. He had spent so long building walls against the pain of loss. Now, here was this tiny girl, tearing them down with every breath she drew. As winter turned, John noticed signs in the woods that hadn't been there before. Tracks that didn't belong to deer or bear, twigs broken clean at shoulder height, smoke trails that vanished before he could follow. He was being watched, he could feel it. At night the forest felt closer, heavier, but no one approached. He knew enough of the land to understand he was being tested, observed. They wanted to see what he would do with the child, and still he did not hide her. He let them see his care, his commitment, his vulnerability. Because whether they came or not, Willow was his now. The seasons changed, and so did John. He hunted more, not just for himself, but for her. He learned to cook roots he once ignored, to fashion toys from carved wood. The cabin filled with sounds it hadn't known for years. Babbling, laughter, lullabies hummed in broken voice. Willow smiled often now, her cheeks rosy with health. And John, once a ghost among the trees, walked with purpose again. He was a father, not by blood, but by choice, and that choice gave his life meaning. There were nights when the wind carried voices. He would hear them faintly, like whispers in the dark. Willow. Her name, spoken not by him, but by the land itself, by the forest. He began to feel something more than watched. He felt part of something, as though the child had rooted him into the earth. He sat outside his cabin often now, with Willow in his arms, both of them listening. And though he didn't know her story or where she had come from, he believed the forest did, and he hoped that was enough. By nightfall, John had saddled his second horse and packed food, blankets, and ammunition, not out of fear, but respect. Willow had survived something larger than him, and if they were coming, he wouldn't let her face them alone. As he cinched the saddle, Willow stood by with calm resolve. There was no fear in her now, only fire. That night, wind howled across the valley. Coyotes cried in the dark. Willow sat silently beside the hearth, while John leaned against the doorframe, rifle ready, watching the horizon. Then, like ghosts rising from the mist, figures emerged, silent, steady. A long line of warriors, 200 strong. The lead warrior dismounted alone. He approached slowly without a weapon. John stepped out, shoulders squared. The man spoke softly in a language John didn't know, but Willow did. She stepped beside him, took his hand, and translated, "He's her uncle. They've come for her, to honor what you gave." What John had given wasn't just shelter. It was dignity, protection, and humanity, in a world too quick to take it from the vulnerable. Willow's people didn't forget such things, and neither did John. Her uncle offered him a carved bow, a symbol of peace, kinship, and eternal bond. John took it, speechless. They asked him to come, just for a time, to ride with them, to see her home. Willow looked up at him with eyes that no longer held hunger, only hope. John nodded. The man who hadn't left his ranch in over a decade climbed into the saddle without hesitation. Their journey lasted days, across rivers, through forests, and into the heart of sacred land. Wherever they stopped, people emerged to greet Willow with open arms. The girl who had vanished had returned, not alone, but with the cowboy who had kept her safe. In the village, Willow's grandmother embraced her. Long sobs and soft words filled the air. John stepped back, unsure if he belonged. But one of the elders took his hand and pressed it to his chest. "You are part of this circle now," the elder said. John stayed for 3 seasons. He taught, learned, and listened. He watched Willow grow stronger, her laughter returning, her songs echoing in the wind. He had come from silence, but here he found song. When he finally returned to his ranch, it wasn't empty anymore. His heart held voices, stories, and names. The bracelet still hung by his bedpost, and sometimes he swore he heard Willow's giggle in the wind. Every season, they came. Riders from the east bringing gifts, stories, and news of Willow. She was learning to lead now, becoming her people's voice. And always she ended her letters the same way: "Thank you for being my shelter." John never married, never left Wyoming. But he was never alone again. His fire never went out, because somewhere, out on the wind, lived a little girl he once saved, who had, in turn, saved him. And so the legend spread, of a cowboy and a starving child, of how one act of kindness returned in waves, of how warriors lined up not in anger, but in honor, of how sometimes the strongest bond is the one forged in silence and kept alive by love.